Shalom and welcome to the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. Today we're looking at Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 29. We're almost to the end of this long series of oracles of judgment against God's people. You may recall that there was a sort of a sub-oracle that started in verse 27, where the Lord appointed Jeremiah as a tester and assayer of metals, to see the quality of the people, so to speak. And obviously the Lord's looking for gold and silver, and what he's found so far has been bronze and iron, which are not noble metals. And that metaphor is going to continue in this verse. The verse has some tricky parts to it, so let's go ahead and read it in Hebrew as we get started. Nahar mapuach me'eshatam ofaret lashav tzaraf tzaruf Vera'im lo nitaku. So we start off with this little word nahar, which looks like it's going to be real easy. It looks like it's going to be just a cal of something, perfect 3ms. And indeed, if we look at one of the standard dictionaries, we look at the Halot lexicon, they're going to list this as a cal. It's going to be a perfect, and it's going to be a 3ms, and it's going to be a cal. And according to them, this is from the verb nahar, exactly these three letters that you see here, which means to puff, like you would squeeze a bellows, because that's the word we're going to get afterwards, like in a blacksmith shop. It's only used. This word, in this sense, would be only used a couple of times, and they're relating it to a noun, which is used a little bit later on, even in Jeremiah chapter 8, I think verse 16, for snorting, like a horse would snort through its nose. So it's that sort of an idea of this strong gust of air that's coming out like a snort. But here it's going to be the bellows that's snorting. Now, BDB, which is a slightly older lexicon, lists it as something a little bit different. They see this as a nifal. They see it as a nifal perfect 3ms from the verb harar. So the nun in the front, they consider as part of the nifal prefix, and the verb harar, which would mean would mean to be hot or to scorch, but in the nifal would have a reflexive idea to be scorched. And that also sort of fits a little bit with the imagery that we have here of all something heating going on with the bellows and smelting of metals. And so there's a little bit of a debate between the exact root. They're actually not too far away, because obviously when you're heating up the bellows with air and pushing the bellows, by working them, the heat is increasing and the heat is coming back on the bellows to some extent. But the lexicons do see this as coming from potentially two different verbs here, and that actually shows up in some of the translations. So I'm not totally sure, and they both sort of make sense, which is the difficulty. So, let's go on. This other word here, mapuach, is actually from a noun nafak. If we would take the meme off, that makes the noun, but we have this verb nafak, and that verb means to breathe or to blow, and this noun, mapuach, that we get from it, this would be the root of it. This word here would mean the bellows. So this is something that's used in the smelting process. So what we would have here is, again, according to what you have, either bellows blow or have been blown, or in other words, have been activated very strongly, or bellows have become scorched. So there's two ways of understanding this. Either way, something very dramatic is going on. Now this next word is kind of funny too, and it's we're going to have a Ketiv and a Karei reading. If you look at the text as it's written, this is what's actually in the text. But it's hard to figure out what this is. If some people think that this is perhaps from min, we would have here the prefix min at the front, and then you would have at the end, they say you might actually have a suffix. This would be a 3MP suffix. And then this would be esha with a hey, which is a sort of an alternate version of eish, fire, and that would be from their fire. Perhaps, but then you have this word at the very end, which is one big word, which means lead, like the metal lead that's used in the smelting process. So it's hard to figure out how from their fire, the bellows are blown from their fire lead. Most scholars that work with this text think we should probably divide the word here, and if you look at the Kare reading, that's actually what we have. So you would still have me'esh at the beginning. The vowels would be different, obviously, but the mean would be, this would be the preposition mean, which lengthens the vowel underneath. Then you'd have the word esh, which means fire, from the fire. And then you'd have tam, which in this case, this tam, that would actually be a verb, and it would be a perfect. It would be a 3ms and a kal from the verb tamam. Tamam, oh, that would be a meme like that, and then a final nun like that, which means to be complete. And here it would be to be consumed. So from fire, it is consumed, and what is consumed? The lead. So from fire, lead is consumed. Now, what does that mean? Well, I had to go back, and there's actually a very good note in the Net Bible on this verse, if you have that resource available to you, that explains a little bit of the smelting process, because I'm not a blacksmith and I don't know how that works. But apparently lead is added to the molten ore, and the lead is added as sort of a flux to mix with the impurities, and so the lead would be used up in the smelting process as it mixed with the impurities, and it would leave the precious metals afterwards, so that the silver and the gold would be left over. Well, in this case, from the fire, the lead is consumed. In other words, they've used up all the lead in the smelting process, in this flux process, to try and get rid of the impurities, and there's still, the lead's all gone, and there's still impurities that are left behind. So there's so much impurity in this ore, they're having a real hard time coming up with any sort of good metal whatsoever. And that seems to make sense, and that's just a division of the consonants. You don't have to, you do have to change the vowels a little bit, but it keeps the same consonants. You're just dividing them right here and making that division there. The Septuagint seems to go in the same direction as well, so that's probably a good way to do it. Most of our modern versions are going to go in that direction. For vanity, la shova, or la shav, as we have it here. So for emptiness, for vanity, you know this little vowel which we call a schwa. Well, here's the name written out, shava, which means emptiness. That's actually a grammatical term, linguistic term that's used in modern day English and other languages. A schwa means a sort of an empty sound. But here is the actual word. It actually comes from the Hebrew when we use it in modern day language. It traces its origins back to the Hebrew for this word. In emptiness, or for emptiness, or in vain, we would say. Tzaraf, now this is just a perfect 3ms from the verb to smelt or to refine. So he refines tzaruf. And this is an infinitive absolute. This one, as we said, was a perfect 3ms kal, and this is an infinitive absolute kal from the same verb. And there seems to be a nuance with the infinitive absolute, which is placed after the verb. Sometimes we find it before to intensify it. With the infinitive absolute placed afterwards, it seems to perhaps have this nuance of continually, some sort of a prolonged action. So, in vain, he has refined continually. He has continued the refining process, we might say, something like that. So he has refined, refining, on and on. And the wicked, and we just have a substantive, plural, masculine, plural substantive of ra, meaning evil or wicked, and the wicked ones are not. And nitaku, what do we have here? This is going to be a perfect. This is going to be a 3mp, or third common plural if you want, with the u sufformative. But this is a nifal from the verb natak, like that, which means to be, which means to pull away, to draw away. The nun that you see here is the nun of the nifal, and the nun of the root natak is actually in that little dogish right there. So this means to pull away, but in the nifal it would mean to be pulled away, to be separated, to be removed. You can see the smelting process, and the evil are not removed. Normally they would have been pulled away or removed through the flux process by adding this molten lead, but it hasn't worked. The evil ones are still there. So you see this very, very dramatic imagery of the process of metallurgy, and some of you could probably explain this a whole lot better than I've been able to do here in this video. But obviously the purification process has not worked. That's why the Lord is finally bringing his ultimate judgment. Well, let's go ahead and hide our work here and look at a couple of translations. First of all, in the ESV, the bellows blow fiercely. So they've taken this with the halot definition of it, to blow with this root here. They blow fiercely. The lead is consumed, so they've divided this up as well. The lead is consumed from the fire, by the fire. In vain, the refining goes on. He refines, refining. So in vain, the refining goes on, just to smooth that out a little bit. For the wicked, they've made this into a sort of an explanative here, literally and, but for, as understandable in the context, the wicked are not removed. And then in the New American Bible, not New American Standard, but the New American Bible, Catholic edition, Revised edition, the bellows are scorched. So they seem to have taken this more from the harar root instead up here as a nifal. So the bellows are scorched, which almost comes back to the same idea, because the bellows are scorched. Why are they scorched? Because the heat, they've worked so hard to get this fire so intense to try and purify the metal, and it hasn't worked. And the lead is consumed by the fire, and the same result. And the vein has the refiner refined, so they're keeping that a little more literal here. The refining goes on. The wicked are not drawn off, which is a good way of explaining not removed, keeping with the imagery here. And one more, I mentioned the Net Bible. Well, here's their translation that they use, a little bit more on the paraphrase side of a translation. The fiery bellows of judgment burned fiercely. So they've almost combined this whole imagery up here and almost have both ideas of the two possible roots. In any case, you get the idea of what's going on. They're burning fiercely, but there's too much dross to be removed. So they don't even mention the lead, but they're explaining the process of what's going on here. There's too much dross to be removed. The lead has been completed, and it's still not done. So that's definitely a paraphrase more than a translation, but it's a pretty good explanation. The process of refining them has proved useless, in vain. The wicked have not been purged. That's another good translation, or at least an explanation of what this verb is all about in this verse. Wow, it's quite a dramatic verse here. And we're going to come to, in the next verse, we'll be looking at the final conclusion of the chapter and of this sub-oracle relating to the process of purging. The Lord does have a purging process for his people. He wants us to be quick to respond to it, so he doesn't have to take such drastic measures. But there are times in the lives of people and in the lives of churches and the lives of countries even, where the purging process has to go to dramatic extents. Wow, quite a verse. We'll check back with us soon as we continue working through Jeremiah in the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. Shalom.